solar wasn't very big. There were a lot of early adopters like Tupper that were doing it at that point, but it certainly wasn't anything that was in mainstream. And you wouldn't see the volume of solar installers like you see today. So we had a few lean years in the beginning, and we were in it for the love, not for the money. We started out as anti-nuclear activists, and we had spent a lot of years protesting nuclear, saying don't do this, don't do that. That was a very reactive strategy to things, and we decided at one point to be proactive instead of being reactive, and I coined a term that I really liked, that we were proactivists, not reactivists. And why is it that it was solar that we got into? Well, the first thing is that it's not nuclear, with all the disadvantages that come along with that, and I'm sure everybody here knows those disadvantages, and if not, we can certainly talk about that offline. And it's not fossil fuels, and we knew that we needed to do something about climate change. Certainly there have been a lot of different opinions over the decades about climate change. Certainly everybody's heard the climate deniers, that man is not causing climate change, and I very, very firmly believe that we do. And I was in a conversation several years ago with someone that was in that camp. I don't know if we're doing anything ourselves for, causing climate change, because, the carbon is here. We're just taking it from one place and it's going somewhere else. And I came up with an analogy with this person that I really liked, and for today I've dusted it off a little bit. I haven't thought about this in years. But during my conversation with him, I said, well, think about the carbon that's sequestered in the ground as being a blanket, a heavy blanket inside the chest. We can sit on that chest, and that blanket does not make us any warmer at all. But if we take that blanket out of that chest and put it over us, like what we're doing with the carbon that's sequestered in the earth now and putting that into the atmosphere, and not allowing the heat from the sun to escape back out, that blanket's keeping us very warm. And climate change, in a very distilled down form, a real simplification of that, is climate change is like that blanket. What we're doing is we're putting something there that's keeping us much warmer than what we should be. And so, as we were transitioning from being reactivists to proactivists, it felt like we needed to do something more. And what was that we could do? Claire had quit her job. She was at one point working as the assistant to the executive director of the anti-nuclear organization. And I was working in a foreign car repair shop, repairing people's vehicles and allowing them to mindlessly drive their car without issues because we were keeping it in good shape. And we wanted to do something different. And Claire was also, she had been having a lot of fun at her job. She was getting arrested, she was doing civil disobedience, and it's like, my job was not fun like that. I wasn't getting thrown in jail. And so I wanted to do something more fun like what she was doing, and I decided to quit my job. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And the day that I gave my notice, I got back home and I said, okay, Claire, I've done it. I gave my notice. I don't know what I'm going to do. Nobody's going to hire me at my age. I'm not going to find anything. I'm going to die a pauper. I was really nervous about it. And I said, well, tonight they're having green drinks at Mesa Verde. Let's go to Mesa Verde. I'd really like to get into renewables. I have no idea what I want to do. I said, I'd get into solar, but, I don't want to get up on roofs. I'm afraid of heights. That's not going to be the right thing for me. I'd like to do what that guy in Greenfield is doing. He's got that little storefront selling stuff and doing little installations here and there, but, you know, I don't want to compete directly against him. He seems like a very nice guy. So we went to Mesa Verde and nobody was there, and I said, this is how it's going to be. I'm not going to find anything. I am going to die of hunger. We walked out of Mesa Verde. Claire said, you need to walk some of this nervous energy off, and then she looked and she said, well, let's walk into the Greenfield Solar store and see how that guy's doing. Maybe we can, you know, talk to him. And we walked in, and the first thing he said was, I'm glad you guys are here. I need some help. I'm not running this business well by myself. Can you come in and help me? In fact, if you want to come in and be partners in the business with me, I'd like to take you guys on as partners. And I said, I can't believe you just said that. I quit my job today. Claire started the following Monday, helping Mark with some of the things that he needed. We worked with Mark for nearly 3 years. We bought him out. We went through some lean years ourselves, but here we are. That's why we're doing solar. It felt like the right thing to do when I had a passion for it, and there was my opportunity, so that's what we're doing now. There's a lot of talk about solar these days. A lot of people are talking about doing solar, a lot of people are doing solar. There's certainly a lot of companies out there hawking solar. Al Norman just spoke to me a few minutes ago about, can I say anything about all the companies on the internet making the claims? Can I say anything about all the door knockers that are going around the neighborhoods, knocking on door after door after door? And yes, we will cover that stuff, and if I don't cover that stuff to anybody's satisfaction, or if I forget to do it in the middle of my talk, get back to me, raise your hand and say, but John, what about talking about this stuff? There's also a lot of talk about utility scale solar. Should the utilities be putting up solar? Should they have ownership of solar? Should they be benefiting from the solar? What about all these big solar developments? What about the developers that are putting solar in, cutting down forest land in Wendell, putting solar on farmlands in Northfield? You know, a lot of people in this room are activists like Claire and I were, and part of that activism is keeping solar from going into the places that solar shouldn't go into, like farmlands, like forest, you know, or at least using that as a last resort. We need all the solar we can get. There's places that it is going to need to go that maybe we're not happy about it. But we need to get as much into the places that we are happy about. And the places that we're not as happy about, some of those are going to need to be done anyway. There's more to it than what you might see on the face of it, like solar on farmland. Some of that farmland is not historically used for good uses. It's not been feeding people. It's been growing sod, or it's been growing corn for ethanol, or it's going to be turned into housing lots. Certainly solar is a better use of those lands than another group of homes, or a sod farm, or ethanol production. And we need as much as we can install. Landfills are a limited resource. Certainly they're a good place to put solar if you can do it. We're going to run out of landfills before we've filled our need for solar. There's limited room in the built environment. That's part of the problem these days about all the solar that is going into Western Massachusetts. There isn't the room in Eastern Massachusetts to do the solar that we can do out here. There's more room out here. We're going to be getting the people out here, the developers coming out this way and trying to do it, trying to make their money out here. The utility solar, that benefits the utilities. It doesn't benefit us as much, certainly financially. The utilities would like it if they owned all the solar. The utilities would like it if we didn't own own so much solar, to shed some light on a little bit of pushback from the utilities. You know, people hear about long interconnection times, high interconnection costs, the utilities throwing hurdles up, throwing roadblocks up for, you know, developers or, you know, even small commercial and residential trying to put solar in. What is the reason for that? People think right away that the reason is because the utilities are losing revenue from it because you're producing solar on your own roof and you're not buying electricity from the grid, and that's going to sink the grid. Well, that's not really why the utilities have pushed back against solar so much. Utilities have pushed back against solar because of the business model that was created during the Rural Electrification of America program back in the 1930s. You think about a little town like Shelburne Falls, where you have the hydroelectric plant right there in the center of the village, and you have all the village homes and the village businesses and the village manufacturing. Lampson & Goodnow was right there, making steel. It was very easy for that utility that owned that infrastructure there to put the poles in the ground and put the wires on the poles and the meters on the houses for a few hundred customers that were in very close proximity and make that into a business model that worked for them and was profitable for them. But when the decision was made on the federal level in the 30s to try to get electricity to all the little rural farmhouses that were 12 miles away from the electric plant, that wouldn't work for the utilities because 12 miles worth of poles and 12 miles worth of wires were not going to be cost effective for them to put in for 1 meter or 2 meters or, you know, whatever was in that area that they had to go out to. So because the utilities were regulated, basically a regulated monopoly, they had, you know, monopoly rights, but they had to be regulated somehow. The regulators determined that they would allow the utilities to rate base the cost for putting in those poles, putting in those wires, running all the new infrastructure out to the places that needed to be electrified. And so there'd be a small charge on each one of the few hundred bills in that little village to pay for the electricity and the infrastructure that went out to that one rural farmhouse. And to sweeten the deal for the utilities, the regulators also said, if you need to borrow money to do it, we'll pay the interest on the money that you need to borrow. To make your shareholders want to agree to this, to give them some buy-in, we will guarantee your shareholders 12% on whatever needs to be spent. So that means if there's ledge where they're trying to put the poles in, if there's anything that causes cost overruns, you can rate base the cost overrun, you can rate base the cost of borrowing capital, you can rate base the profits to your shareholders, you can rate base all of it. I wish my business ran that way. If I had something that I didn't know about and it cost me more to do an installation, I either have a serious conversation with the customer about it, or I eat it, or a combination thereof. I don't get 12%, I don't get profit of 12% on the cost overrun. So the utilities have a need for more electricity. You know, we need to get more power to Boston. How are they going to do it? Are they going to say, well, everybody should put solar on their roofs, and then those people that have solar on their roofs are using the electricity from the generators that we have now, and we can just ship that electricity into Boston? No, that doesn't help the utilities a bit. What helps the utilities is if they own the infrastructure that needs to go in, new transmission lines from Hydro-Quebec in Canada into Boston to bring the electricity. They get to build that. They get to profit on that. They get that guaranteed 12% profit. The gas lines. Eversource owns natural gas infrastructure, National Grid owns natural gas infrastructure. When we see a, and I'll put it in quotation marks, need for new natural gas infrastructure, that's a need for 12% more guaranteed profit. So those are a couple of the things that we see about pushback for solar. Siting and putting it in Western Mass and making us bear the burden of providing electricity to Boston by using our farmlands, by using our forest lands. And the utilities push back about they're not making the profits on the new infrastructure that goes in. So what are our options? Well, first off, how many people in this room have solar? Okay, so there's some that do and there's some that don't, and it's almost 50-50. So for those people that do have solar, think about why you have solar, how you've benefited from it. If you've benefited from it, would you do it again? And what would you say to the people that don't have solar? For the people that don't have solar, why not? What have been the hurdles? What have been the reasons that you have not done it, have felt that maybe it's not the right thing for you, you don't have the money for it, you don't have the time to think about it, or you haven't realized what the incentives are, what the benefits are for you, or you just don't know how solar works. You don't know anything about it, or you have preconceived notions about what solar is. So, how does solar work? There's a couple of ways that solar is done these days. What most people thought about years ago, what solar was what I would call off-grid solar. You've got a cabin in the woods, or you're too far away from the utility, so you buy solar panels, you get a bank of batteries, the solar panels charge the batteries run your house, you've taken care of yourself. That's your solution, so you have power that way. And a lot of people probably still think that that's what solar is, that you've got to have batteries, they're messy, they're smelly, But Tupper was one of the early innovators. Tupper was 2004. So late 90s, early 2000s, a company called SMA in Germany pioneered the technology of grid-tied solar and came up with an inverter that would synchronize with the utility. So you put solar panels on your roof, you put an inverter connected to the solar panels, the inverter is also connected to the service panel in your house. That inverter gets a signal from the service panel in your house, it knows what the frequency is that the grid is operating on, it knows what the voltage is that the grid is operating at, and it synchronizes to those and it turns itself on. And it takes the DC electricity from the solar panels, converts that into AC electricity, and feeds that into your service panel, just like the utility feeds into your service panel. So your house runs off of the solar, or your house runs off of the grid, or both. There's going to be times where your house is not producing as much as what you use. There's times that it's going to be producing more, and so you're running on a combination, or you can actually be producing more electricity than what you use. That goes back through your meter, that gets counted as exported from your house, that goes onto the grid, and that helps run your neighbor's house because he doesn't have solar on it. What we do on-grid solar. We've done a little bit of off-grid solar over the years. That's not where my passion is. I try to limit the amount of off-grid solar that we do because that takes away from being able to concentrate on the on-grid solar, and the on-grid solar is where my passion is. It really feels to me like on-grid solar is a community solution, not just solving your own energy issues. So putting solar on your rooftop, one of the things that does to address the issues that I talked about earlier is the more rooftop solar we have, the more that negates the need for some of the larger farm and forest arrays that we've been trying to fight against. And you know, if we're trying to advocate for better siting, one of the things that I feel that we really need to do to advocate for better siting is to lower the demand for the bad sites and offset as much of the electricity that we can by ourselves, so that there's less need for some of the places that we would prefer not to see solar. What are some of the hurdles to doing solar ourselves? Certainly one of the things has been the cost. The cost of solar has dropped a lot over the years. When Claire and I did solar on our house, you know, we decided that it was the right thing to do. We knew that there were some incentives. We contacted a couple of solar companies. I had no clue that I was going to be doing this at that point. I was still working as a service manager in a foreign car repair shop. And we had those companies come in and give us proposals for doing solar. We got a proposal for a 1.2 kilowatt system and a 1.8 kilowatt system. And of those people here that have solar know that that's pretty small. And I was concerned at the time that, you know, the 1.2 kilowatt system wouldn't generate what we needed to offset our usage annually, that maybe we needed to go with a 1.8 kilowatt system, but the 1.8 kilowatt system was a lot more expensive. So being the cheap Yankee that I am, I said, well, I kind of really want to go for the 1.2 kilowatt system, but will it meet all our needs? And Claire said, if it doesn't meet all our needs, we'll figure out a way to lower our needs. Which I think was great on her. Less embodied energy in the materials, less cost. Less cost felt important to me. Back then, we paid $11 a watt for our solar panels, where you can get installations now residentially down near $3 a watt. So there's a big difference. Some people are renters. They don't own the rooftop that they live under. They can't put solar there. Some people have trees in the way. Some have slate roofs, and we won't install on the slate roof. So the roof would need to be changed, or the person doesn't get solar on their roof. Maybe we could do a ground-mounted unit in their yard, or put a tracker in their yard or something. For those that can do solar, there are good incentives. One, solar is a lot less expensive than it was several years ago, as I mentioned. The Biden administration has extended the 30% federal tax credit, so you pay $30,000, and just numbers that are easy to, you know, do the math in my head on. $30,000 for a solar photovoltaic system, 30% federal tax credit would be a $9,000 federal tax credit. There's a $1,000 state tax credit. It is 15% of the system cost is the way that's written. But this state, in its infinite wisdom several years ago, made a cap of $1,000. So 15% of whatever the system cost is, but capped at $1,000. But that brings after you've received your tax credits, that brings your cost of that system down to $20,000, down to $30,000. And you're offsetting your electric costs. And there still is another incentive called Class 1 Renewable Energy Certificates. That only amounts to a few $100s per year. But if you take your avoided electricity costs, and electricity prices have gone up quite a bit over the last few years, add that into your renewable energy credits, divide that into the $20,000 outlay you have for your system, it might be 5 to 8 years that you can look at the numbers and say, I've made my money back on this. It has already paid for itself. It doesn't owe me anything anymore. And how many investments can you make where you can say, it doesn't owe me anything now in that period of time? And this is an investment that's going to last decades. Somebody asked me a few minutes ago before we started this, how long do solar panels last? Well, the industry has found that the degradation of solar panels is less than 0.25% per year. So after 25 years, they're still putting out more than 90% of what they originally made when you bought them. So at what point do you say, they're no good anymore, they're worn out, they're not doing what they should do, I'm going to replace them? That's going to be longer than any of us in this room have to worry about. So, financially, solar works well. Environmentally, solar works well. We've run the numbers on embodied energy and the amount of raw materials and what those raw materials are and the amount of carbon emissions in producing solar panels, transporting those solar panels to the site, getting the crew to the site, installing the solar panels, getting everything up and running, and then how much power that offsets. Depending on the siting, I've seen claims of just over a year, but easily 3 or 4 year time frame, you can be net positive on knowing that you've avoided more carbon into the atmosphere than what it took to make your equipment. Another one of the hurdles about doing solar has been trees, and I don't want to cut any trees to put any solar in. Well, if you again run the numbers on how much carbon sequestration will a tree do versus how much carbon are you avoiding by producing electricity with a clean source like solar, it takes about 7 trees to offset the same amount of carbon as 1 kilowatt of solar panels. So the average size system that we seem to be doing now is somewhere 7 to 8 kilowatts. So that would be 49 to 56 trees that you'd have to cut to say, oh, I've cut too many trees here and my solar is not offsetting the carbon that I use. And, you know, I don't think there's any customers that are doing anything on their rooftops or in their backyards that need to cut between 49 and 56 trees to install a 7 to 8 kilowatt system. So I still look at solar as being, you know, a net positive. And unfortunately, I think that math probably works too for, you know, taking acres of land in Shrewsbury, say, you know, cutting all this forested land and putting solar in. If you just ran those numbers, you say, well, you know, solar is a carbon benefit versus the forest land. But I'd rather cite better than that and, you know, think about the flora and the fauna and the animals that live in that section, the microclimates from the forest and the mature trees. And certainly mature trees sequester more carbon than what immature trees do. When you get virgin forest, that's going to be mature trees. You get somebody's backyard, you know, you might take down a couple trees that are 20 years old, and that's not really a mature tree. And so I make the decision all day long. Let's look at somebody's backyard or rooftop rather than you know, trying to do more in forest land. So financially it works. You know, if your roof works, do it. There's going to be people that can't. There's going to be renters. There's going to be people with bad roofs. There's going to be people with no sun. There's going to be people that, you know, they just don't have the money to do it or don't feel that they have the money to do it. Maybe the people that feel that it's too much of an investment to do are going to, I'll get to Al's topic now, about the clickbait that you see on the internet, the people that are pounding on your doors, the people that are calling you on the phone and saying, you know, we want you to do solar, we'll put it on your roof, and there's no cost to you, no upfront cost. We'll put a roof on your house, we'll upgrade your service panel, we'll do it all for free. As Al says, there's nothing free. We're paying for it somehow. What their business model is They get you to agree to put solar on your roof. They will sell you the electricity that your solar makes at a discounted price to you. You'll get 10% off, 12% off, whatever. So it does, you put no money out up front. It's not costing you anything up front. You're saving money right off the bat, the first month. You're saving 10%, 12% on the electricity that's being generated by the panels on your roof. The next year, the cost to you goes up by 2.9%. Yeah, so you're still saving money. You know, you're saving 9%, 10% instead of 10%, 12%. The next year, it goes up 2.9%. Maybe electricity prices haven't gone up in that period. There's a long time electricity prices were pretty flat. And yes, they've gone up a lot over the last few years, but maybe that's a correction. And maybe they'll plateau again. I don't know that. This company that puts solar on your roof takes those tax credits that you could have taken. Because they own it and they're a commercial entity, they take modified accelerated cost recovery system, makers. It's a way to take equipment that depreciates and depreciate that equipment. So they take a tax credit on it, they take a depreciation on it, they get your renewable energy certificates. They also get revenue from you for buying that electricity from them that they're producing from those solar panels that are on your roof. And that goes up every year. You do the escalator over a 25-year span. What you've actually paid for that free solar system on your roof is about 2.5 times what it would be if you went to any of the local companies around Greenfield and said, I want to buy a system from you. Yes, I know there's money up front. Yes, I know there's probably cost of capital of me buying that system. But I'll buy the system, I'll own it, I'll pay the tax credit myself. I'll get the complete avoided electricity cost myself. I'll sign up with an aggregator and I'll get the renewable energy certificates myself. 2.5 times is what those companies cost you. And they don't do it. They don't cost you as much during your prime years or your younger years. They cost you that much as you get older. The older you get, the more they cost you. I know in my own life, what I've tried to do is when I can do it, I fix my expenses. I lower my expenses. I try to prepare for the day that I retire, and my income isn't what it is now. My expenses won't be what they are now. This is exactly the opposite of doing that. That's one of the places that people go if they can't afford to do solar themselves or feel that they don't want to put the money out themselves to do it. Another one is community solar. Community solar has its place. It gets solar out there. It gets electricity generated. It's a benefit to those people that can't do solar or can't make the investment. It's just not as good a benefit. It's like anything else. If you have the means to do it, you use those means to invest, you get the return from those means. A community solar developer has the means to invest. They invest those means. They get a benefit from it. Part of that benefit is the benefit that you don't get by owning solar yourself. Maybe you can find another way to get more solar installed. Maybe your church or an organization you belong to can install solar. You don't have the roof for it. Maybe your church has a roof for it. Maybe another organization has a roof for it. Maybe you can be one of the people that helps drive that conversation about that organization getting something and benefiting there. Nonprofits, the same thing. There's new municipal and nonprofit incentives that there weren't a few years ago. Municipalities or nonprofits don't have the tax liability, couldn't take that tax credit, And we're leaving money on the table compared to, what a developer could get or what a homeowner could get in those tax credit incentives. Well, now municipalities and nonprofits can get what's called refundability. They pay for the solar, they pay for the entire system, and then they get actually refunded by the federal government money that they would have incurred in taxes had they been tax-paying entities. Claire has a clarification. They get the same 30%.
It starts this year,
Mm-hmm.
so no fire resistance.
Right. You can't claw back, a municipality or a nonprofit cannot claw back anything that they've paid in taxes and said, hey, there's that 30% out now, I want my 30%. It's anything moving forward, any entities moving forward that can do that. And it is the same 30% that the developer gets, it's the same 30% that a homeowner gets. If you have solar or if you get solar and you oversize your system, you can allocate to someone else. You can allocate to your church. You can allocate to your friends. You can allocate to your in-laws. You can take the extra credit that you're making on your system from your generation exceeding your usage. And on each month, you can say, okay, I want 50% of my monthly credit or 100% of my monthly credit to go on to someone else's account. So there's another creative way for people that can't do solar on their own roofs. They can work with someone else where someone that can allocate to them. Maybe they can help that person with the upfront cost of the system, or do something in that way. Another way to drive solar and installation of solar, and good installation of solar, well-sited installation of solar, is to work on policy. I know there's a handful of people in this room that do policy work, and do policy work for other other things, other ideals, and those people working on solar policy, we can certainly help people find their way to plug in there and use their energy to help move us along. You look like you're going to make a comment. I'm going to get you up when I'm done, and you're going to talk about legislation that's possible in the session. And John.
If anyone has a question, I have the microphone. Just let me know. People raise hands.
If anybody wants any clarification on anything, if anybody thinks I'm going too long, if anybody thinks that I haven't touched on anything that they want to, certainly feel free to raise your hands. Joan will get you a mic. Help me out here. That's not a problem at all. Like I said, Tucker knows I can't talk for an hour, so. What else can we do? From a climate change perspective, one of the things that we need to do is electrify everything that we can electrify. We need to electrify our heating and get off of fossil fuels. We need to electrify our transportation and get off of fossil fuels. We need to electrify our cooking, get off of fossil fuels, and clean the indoor air quality inside our homes by having combustion sources of cooking inside our homes. I look at it like, having a running vehicle inside my house. If I have, a propane or natural gas stove running inside the house, I know that there are things that are produced during that combustion that are not good to have in my inside air. And another benefit of doing that, of electrifying everything, is if you have solar, you're multiplying your savings. The mile per gallon equivalent of an electric car is much, much higher than the mile per gallon equivalent of gasoline car. Gasoline cars, probably people are doing well if they're getting somewhere in the 30s for mileage. We've got a couple of electric vehicles. We electrified our transportation in 2015 and haven't looked back. 140, 150 miles per gallon equivalent is not unheard of for the vehicles that we're driving. And if you are taking your solar-produced free electricity from the sun and putting that into your vehicle and driving around with that, what a good financial calculation that is. Same thing with heating and cooling. We've had mini splits in our house for the last, we put our first mini split in probably 6 or 7 years ago, the second mini split in about 5 years ago. The third mini split we put in this year. When we did our first mini split, we decided, you know what, we're not going to run. We had a wood pellet boiler at the time, and I didn't even want to burn wood pellets and put those particulates into the air, put that carbon into the air, even though it wasn't a fossil fuel. So we decided we're going to run our mini split as much as we can. Well, the last 5 years or so, we haven't had anything except mini splits to provide the heat in our house, and we've done it. Each time we've put a new mini split in, we've been a little bit warmer that winter, but we've gotten by each year. And again, that multiplies your savings because the electricity that you're getting offsets home heating oil, offsets propane, offsets natural gas. Those prices have all gone up, and those prices are going up higher. And the efficiency of heat pumps, the efficiency of electric cars, naturally pair with doing solar. When I said that Claire and I started as anti-nuclear activists, one of the ways that we would talk to people when we would sit in their kitchen is we would say, look, let's figure out how to use less electricity. Change this habit. Get this more efficient appliance. Shut this power strip off. Get rid of these phantom loads. Let's get your electrical load down as low as you can. And we'll put solar panels on your roof and offset what it is that you can't reduce. We flip that on its head now. Solar panels have gotten a lot less expensive. Now we tell people, think about everything that you want to electrify. Think about how many miles you want to drive in a year, what car you're going to be driving. Let's figure out how many kilowatt hours a year that may take. Let's figure out how many rooms you want to put on mini splits, or your entire house on mini splits, and what that may take for electricity generation to run those. Let's put as much solar on your roof as we can put on. And I'm not doing it, do you want fries with that Coke? Do you want, a bigger burger? I'm not trying to upsize. I'm trying to give people the economy of scale. If my crew is going to show up there and do a system, if they're going to put 5 panels on or 45 panels on, a lot of that work is the same, the paperwork is the same, a lot of the infrastructure is the same, we've got to run the same amount of conduit. Gain the economy of scale of doing that and use it to multiply the savings of getting your car off of fossil fuels, getting your house off of fossil fuels. Yes?
How much more sales do you need versus
So, it depends on where you start. What's that?
Repeat the question, please.
Okay, yeah. Because I've got the microphone and you don't.
There it is.
How many more panels does it take if you're going to electrify everything versus if you're not going to electrify everything?
In other words, if you have just the basic model, so to speak, without electrifying your heat and electrifying your car, whatever,
Right.
versus the deluxe model, so to speak, how many more panels do you need? How much more do you have to add in?
Mostly that depends on where your baseline starts. Before everybody started to electrify heat, before everybody started to electrify transportation, I would go into homes and I would look at people's electric bills. That would be one of the first things I did when I was having a conversation with them. And some people were using 10 kilowatt hours a day. The Franklin County average seemed to be 19 kilowatt hours a day. The national average at that point, 15 years ago, was touted as being 29 kilowatt hours a day. That all made sense to me. We're frugal Yankees here, like I am. The rest of the country using 29 kilowatt hours, maybe a lot of that was air conditioning, you know, you're talking about the South and so on. The frugal Yankees were using 19. As a general rule, the more frugal of us Yankees were using 10. Now, if you're going to need, you know, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 kilowatt hours a year for heating, if you're going to need, I say the car will get about 4 miles per kilowatt hour of electricity consumed. So if you drive 12,000 miles a year, you're going to use 3,000 kilowatt hours. So if you're taking, let's say, 5,000 kilowatt hours for your heating, and you're taking 3,000 kilowatt hours for your transportation, and you're one of those people that uses 5,000 kilowatt hours a year, you're going to need a system that's almost 3 times as big as what you would just for your baseline, just for the economy model. If you're one of those homes that I go into and I look at their bill and say, this person is using 50 kilowatt hours a day on average, times 365 days a year, so that's what, 73,000 kilowatt hours in a year? Another, you know, 10,000 kilowatt hours for heat transportation. Well, you know, if they're using 50 kilowatt hours a day, they're probably not going to heat their house for 5,000 kilowatt hours a year. But you see the difference is, it's not linear. But that is a good question. So that would be one of the things that a good solar installer would sit down with you and say, what are you using now? What are you thinking about using? This is my recommendation. Let's hash it out and figure out what looks like it's the right thing for you.
I have a house, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a house that's over 200 years old. When I bought it almost, 24 years ago, the 3 different types of wiring were grandfathered in.
Mm-hmm.
So can you hook up solar to that? Plus I have a slate roof.
So the 3 types of wiring that were grandfathered in, I'm sure you had number 2, you have Romex, and probably, you know, that metal clad stuff was another one that you've got there. The solar doesn't touch any of that stuff that's in the house. It doesn't change anything that happens from your fuse box service panel out into the house. All of that stays the same. It all runs on the same voltage. It all runs on the same frequency. That's seamless. You can't tell the difference between, in quotation marks again, the solar electricity going through the wires in your house or the grid electricity going through the wires in your house. We tie into your service panel, or we tie in between the meter and the service panel if your service panel is not large enough to tie in there. If there aren't any extra breakers left, if the bus bar capacity of the panel isn't big enough. Solar doesn't touch the wiring in the house. The slate roof is a different issue. I love slate roofs. I had a slate roof on my house up until 2 years ago. So I say that I got the last 33 years out of my 100-year slate roof. I kept that beautiful roof on my house as long as I could. And when it got to the point where all of the slates were all kicking off to an angle at the rake edge, and you know they're falling off because the nails are failing, because it was 100 years old, because the cedar shakes underneath it were all failed and crumbly, and they weren't keeping the slates tight to the roof anymore. I finally got to the point where I said, you know what? We're taking the slate roof off of the house. I don't want to be in my 80s hiring slate roofers if you can find them, year after year after year, getting somebody to replace that roof. We're going to put a standing seam metal roof on it. I'm not going to have to worry about it through the rest of my 60s. I'm not going to have to worry about it through my 70s. I'm not going to have to worry about it in my 80s. It's all done. It's an expense that I can bite the bullet and afford it and do it now, and I never have to worry about it again. So that's one option. Another option is we go to people's homes, they have a slate roof on their house. Maybe we can do it on their barn, maybe we can do it on an outbuilding, maybe we can do it on the ground, maybe we can do it in their field. Maybe we can't do it, but, you know, we look at all those options, discuss all those options, and try to figure out what we can do and what's going to be the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. One is, do the panels come in standard sizes, and what's the kilowatt on the most standard sizes? And the other is, many of these roofs are quite steep here in New England. Is that an issue?
So, panels do come in standard sizes. There's right now a handful of standard sizes between different manufacturers, and those standard sizes change every few years. As panel manufacturers grasp at trying to get more efficiency out of their panels, and grasp at trying to be competitive, try to be cost competitive, cell sizes change. Cell sizes have gotten much larger over the years. So you can do the same number of cells in a panel, get more power because you've got more surface area. That makes for a bigger panel. So panels right now range anywhere from mid 300s, like 350 watt panels, to 550 watt panels. Right now, the panels that we're using, they have the highest efficiency, put out the most power per square foot, but they're not the biggest panels. We're using 405s, 40 inches wide, but 72 inches tall. They're good quality, that format's been around for a while, I have good availability of them, I really like the company a lot. I like the product a lot, and that is what I've settled on, and that's what I'm doing for a panel. You might find other solar panel installers that, hey, we've got 550s out there. What's this guy doing playing with 505s? Well, those 550s, you can't get your arms across them, and the guys can't carry them up onto the roof. They're commercial stuff. So there's a non-answer about,
So
panel sizes.
405 is 405 watts,
405 watts.
and it's 40 inches by 72 inches.
Yep.
That's a good answer.
Okay. Good.
How about the steep roof? Is that a problem?
The guys don't like working on steep roofs as much as they do on shallow roofs. They're harder to deal with. It costs me a little bit more to have guys do installation on, a 45 or a 55 degree standing seam metal roof, because, they've got their harnesses up there, and they're having to, their feet are slipping and sliding on the metal roofs, and, pulling themselves up with the harnesses, and, it's a little harder to deal with, but it's certainly not insurmountable at all.
Okay.
What about different efficiency of panels for cloudier climates? I read there was a microcrystalline.
Yeah, monocrystalline versus polycrystalline.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'll give two answers on that question. And the first one is that every solar panel manufacturer out there has the most efficient panels compared to their competition. The second answer is that, yes, there are some differences in efficiency between different types of cell. And there's different efficiencies between different panels and different panel manufacturers and what they've chosen to manufacture their panels from. A monocrystalline panel, so in other words, the cell in that panel is made from a single crystal that is drawn out of a vat of molten polysilicon. And that vat of polysilicon has to be kept molten for a long period of time, and they slowly draw that single crystal out. But that crystal has a very good grain structure to it. They then cut that into the thinnest wafers that they can, and then it goes through the rest of the process where it's doped. It's either doped P-type or N-type, and it's, back contact or front contact, all kinds of different things. But yes, that basic cell structure is better than a polycrystalline cell structure. Polycrystalline is they take that same vat of molten polysilicon and they pour that into a mold. And it flows into that mold and it hardens, but it hardens looking like frost on your window in the winter, where it's a bunch of interlocked crystalline cells, polycrystalline, many crystals. And I don't feel that that's as stable a structure as monocrystalline, and it has less efficiency. Now, if you do all the other things the same as you're doping those, putting the bus bars on them, or the back contacts, putting them behind glass, where the glass is, the difference may not be that big. It may be the difference between 20% for the best of the polycrystallines and 21.5%, so it might be 20.5% for the best of the polycrystallines, it might be 22% for the best of the monocrystallines. But yes, there is a difference between them. And a monocrystalline manufacturer can say, we're more efficient than the other guys. And they're right if they're comparing to polycrystalline. Some of the panel manufacturers say, well, we're using non-glare anti-reflective glass on ours. Because we're using anti-reflective glass, more of the sun's rays come in to the panel, and so we're getting higher efficiency. Everybody uses anti-reflective, non-glare glass on their solar panels. So you've got to separate out the marketing hype from, what's real. Shameless self-promotion here, but at least, full disclosure that it's shameless self-promotion. The panels that we use are a monocrystalline cell. And Sanyo, everybody's probably heard of Sanyo, many years ago developed this technology where they would take a thin film, an amorphous layer that's made differently than these cells that I'm talking about, and they would put that on the face and on the backside of that monocrystalline cell. And so that would do what you're saying. The amorphous layer does really good in low light conditions and cloudy conditions compared to monocrystalline or polycrystalline. But amorphous is horrible on its own. It takes about 4 times as much surface area of amorphous to make the same power as that same surface area of monocrystalline. So if you just had a choice of, do I do amorphous, do I do monocrystalline, or do I do polycrystalline, then monocrystalline, in my book, would be the choice. But Sanyo sandwiched those two types of cell together, so they're getting the benefits of both. Panasonic bought Sanyo. We were a Panasonic distributor for several years. We did Sanyo's back when we were doing Evergreen. Evergreen was a panel that was made in Massachusetts. It fit right in with our parameters. It was local. It was low embodied energy. Their manufacturing technique used a lot less polysilicon than anybody else's did. Less raw materials. Made in Massachusetts. Only shipped, 80 miles. We loved it. They were a fair amount of surface area for the production compared to Sanyo. So on people's roofs, that the size of the system we were doing didn't overwhelm their roof. We do evergreens all day long. We would do Sanyo if the roof was tight and they needed more power. But they were more expensive. They were from Japan. We were trying to use the local stuff. Eventually, Evergreen went out of business because their business model depended on not using as much purified polysilicon, which was really expensive. They could afford U.S. capital rates, they could afford U.S. labor rates, manufacturing here in the U.S., real estate isn't cheap in the U.S., but they could do it because Purified silicon was very expensive, and they didn't have to buy as much of it because their manufacturing technique didn't waste as much during manufacturing. As more and more people were doing solar, solar became more and more mainstream, more and more polysilicon companies came into play. The cost of purified silicon came down, their competitive advantage went away. They could no longer be competitive in the marketplace with their technology producing in the US. They started to move to China, bled all their money away, and went bankrupt, which was unfortunate. So at that point, we needed to find another solar panel manufacturer, and we did a couple that were producing in the US. Shot Solar was one. Shot makes all the glass for skyscrapers in Europe. And they also, for 45 years, had solar panel manufacturing. Well, Shot at one point said, the Chinese government is subsidizing the Chinese solar panel industry. There's a lot of dumping going on. We don't want that. We can't compete in this market. We are going to get out of doing solar, and we're just going to concentrate on what's always made us our money, which is the skyscraper glass. So we were left again without a solar panel manufacturer. We went through Kyocera, which is a Japanese company that had production facilities here in the US. Kyocera eventually closed their facilities in the US because it cost too much to produce solar panels here. We went to Solar World that had a manufacturing facility in Hillsboro, Oregon, and said, okay, this is the last man standing for a US manufacturer. We're going to do Solar World. We did Solar World for a long time. They closed their panel manufacturing facility because you can't compete with the Chinese subsidized market, and they just, lost money. So at that point, I said, there's a local company around that are touting that they have the most efficient solar panel out there, which everybody does. And I said, I want to compare apples to apples. I want my niche to be, maybe we're not the biggest, but we're the best. We give you the best equipment. We give it to you at a good price. I want to be able to say, my solar panels are just as good as yours, and probably even better. So I went with Panasonic. Panasonic, I used them for many years. My Panasonic rep came in one day, and he said, so we've changed our panels. And I said, I don't like change. So your panels have been great. I've used them for years. I've built my business model. I've differentiated myself from other people using your panels because of the quality of your panels. How do I know the quality of the new ones is going to be as good as the quality of old ones? They don't have a track record. And he said, well, yeah, they do. And I said, I've never seen them before. He said, well, says the people that are manufacturing them for us now have a long track record. And they have the best reliability rate of all the manufacturers out there. And I said, really? You're not producing your own panels now? He said, no, we partnered with somebody else. We gave them our technology of the sandwiched, amorphous cell and monocrystalline. And he said, we gave them our technology, and they are using their manufacturing facilities, and they are making panels for themselves, and they're making panels for us. They're making panels for themselves? Yeah, he says, we're white labeling their panel. I said, well, why don't I just buy from them? And he put his head down and he said, well, you should. So I am. Panasonic's market share has dropped precipitously in the US because this company, REC, that was producing the panels for Panasonic was selling with their name on them. Panasonic has picked up all that business with their top-of-the-line panel that's using the Panasonic technology. And Panasonic, I wanted to look into it myself and say, okay, Panasonic is using REC. Panasonic has vetted REC. I should look into REC myself and see if there's somebody that I should use. And I came away very impressed in doing that. I think that was a really long-winded answer about your question about solar panel efficiencies.
Very interesting, though, thank you. The other question I have is that I was reading about them putting solar panels on slate roofs, and with the assistance of somebody whose specialty is slate roofs.
Yeah.
Is that if the roof is structurally sound, then is that a viable alternative?
Let me take the first half of your last sentence, which is if the roof is structurally sound. And that's one of the things that we need to make sure with anybody's roof, whether it's slate, standing seam, composite shingle, asphalt roof, anything. A structural engineer needs to look at the roof, determine species and grade of lumber, unsupported span, rafter dimensions, all of it, and run his calculations and write a letter, say, yes, this roof is strong enough to put solar on, and I submit that with a building permit, and the building inspector asks for that. So that's that piece out of the way. The slate with a caveat. There are companies that make fasteners that will work with slate roofs, and that you can install slate on slate roofs. And those companies that make those fasteners say, we will only do that we will only endorse our product if our product is used on a roof with good decking, with new slate, with new nails, and that we are part of the process where your installers are doing that roof. We come and work with them and do that installation. So to me, that means strip your old slate roof off anyway and start from scratch. But you end up doing a slate roof instead of doing something else. That's a really expensive way to do it. And if basically all you're gaining from that is whatever is not covered, whatever part of the roof is not covered by solar panels, you can see the slate there. That's the advantage. There's no cost advantage to doing it that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me just a minute, I'll get to you. Is this on?
No.
No? John, how are you doing? Are you all right for the
No,
moment?
I'm holding up for now.
All right. Let me tell very quickly a story. For years, John was trying to get me to buy an electric car. And then he gave up on that, I guess, and did give me a good deal for additional panels on my roof, which involved, of course, some engineering and fixing the understructure. And then I discovered that I was accumulating an awful big credit on my electric bill, and so I had to buy an electric car to use it up. And he succeeded. I'll pass the microphone now, but I do want you, John, if you will, please talk about trackers a little bit at some point.
Trackers?
Yeah.
I think you didn't really have a question, you had a statement, but then will I talk about trackers at some point?
Yeah.
Sure, let's hear what Al has to say, and I'll talk about trackers at some point.
John, you mentioned earlier in your presentation something about municipalities serving as potential generators or contractors. Some cities and towns in Massachusetts for 100 years or more have been their own electric power company, Holyoke, Reading, and so forth. Greenfield has an energy corporation. Could you see any policy path for Greenfield to be a solar contractor or generator of power that could be producing electricity that would be of use to its residents? I had a community company approached me several years ago. I won't use their name, but they said that they were building a solar farm in Amherst, and that I want to buy some piece of that. And I said, sure. At the time, it seemed to me that it didn't seem like my roof was going to be feasible for reasons I won't bother to go into, but, you know, I bought into that, which meant probably a couple panels. It wasn't a big investment. My return on that has been minimal. You know, every month I save maybe $7.
Yep.
So it's really not very exciting. But what about the possibility of Greenfield becoming involved in this equation of producing in some fashion? Because I'll just finish. A number of years ago, a mayor of Greenfield had asked me to come to his office, I don't tell you which mayor it was, and talk about municipal power, because he had heard that, you know, there was this group of municipalities that had a Massachusetts Municipal Electric Company, and what about that? And, you know, what about public power? What do you think about that today? Is it possible that public solar power would be an option for Greenfield?
I see somebody chomping at the bit here, she's reaching for the mic.
So Greenfield currently has a number of solar fields on town-owned land. Unfortunately, they're leased systems, so they get some benefit of the electricity that's generated, but it's not, the solar is not owned by the town. So because of the IRA passing last year, there is an opportunity for the town of Greenfield. Specifically, I just don't know where they would locate it, but if they had a piece of land and they had the capital, they could either capitalize it through bonds or some other means. They could certainly then take advantage of the 30% tax credit and get refunded 30% of the system cost. However, with that kind of a project, the town would probably have to hire or add to the duties of the energy coordinator, allocating and managing how the residents benefit from the electricity. There is a process for doing that, so basically Greenfield would have its own community shared solar farm, and they could designate that residents only could be part of it, or they could expand it if there were not enough Greenfield residents who wanted to participate. They could structure it so that the town residents got a 20 or 30% discount, and non-town residents only got 10%. There's a number of ways to make the money side work. There's a lot of imagination that could go into that. The biggest lift is the initial cost and finding a location that's suitable, near three-phase power, near a transmission line, not a transmission line, but near three-phase power, you know, easily developable, large enough to make it financially worthwhile, and that the town actually owns. So it's not insurmountable, but it's certainly possible. You don't need to go to the extent of becoming a municipal power line. That's, I think, far more than Greenfield would want to take on at this point. And so short of that, owning a community shared solar array would certainly meet most people's needs as residents, and even commercial entities can also participate as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I can't tell whether you're saying it's infeasible or not.
There are a number of factors that need to be taken into account, and I can't say it's not impossible. It could be difficult. It could be an easy thing, but it also could be difficult.
We have some land, and probably some impervious land in Greenfield that might be actually fairly large, but
Here's the mic.
Is it something that would even have to be in Greenfield? It could Greenfield buy land in another town and make it get solar farm?
I don't think another town would do that.
They're not going to do it themselves, the other town might want to do it.
I can't hear him.
I don't know how legally that would work out, but anyway.
Is it worth somebody pushing on this?
Oh, yeah, oh, certainly.
Can we share the mic back and forth?
Yeah, it's certainly possible if someone to start working on this, either in town, city hall, or outside of it. There's many avenues yet to pursue.
Gary's got a comment back there too, or a question.
Thanks. Hold a little closer.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Claire, I think it's you and me related. I'm delighted to learn of the refunds for the random refunding of tax credits. I got the sense that it's
Can you
not
hold a little
available
closer?
for everyone.
Sorry.
A
Better
little
speak.
louder.
Sorry.
Louder.
What entities is that refund available for? Specifically, is it available for individuals?
No.
We tried to get it for individuals, homeowners, and the IRS and them. Well, probably, actually, it's also the third-party lease companies, they said, don't want. So right now, it's only available for municipalities and nonprofits. And it's a little bit of a complicated process. It's not straightforward, there's a bunch of paperwork, blah, blah, blah.
Thanks. Some of you know me because I sort of talk about electricity and sort of landscape scale, how we generate it. In the United States, we consume more per capita energy than anybody else. And in Massachusetts, more than anybody else in the world, we lead these outside lives. And we need to stop consuming, is the bottom line of this. I don't see turning our environment and the landscape into an electricity machine as an answer to leaving more to our grandchildren and their grandchildren. I don't see 50 years ago, we did not have even the idea of consuming electricity 24/7. I would think that maybe everybody but me has some electricity buzzing in their pocket right now. I don't believe that we should be driving around in 2- and 4-ton vehicles that are charged up by electricity or anything else. We need to start looking at personal transportation as the enemy. I don't want to take up a lot of time here, but most of you know that I advocate for the river and the monstrously inefficient machine in Northfield. But if you want to look at the latest piece of sort of controversy up in Wendell and what the 8 acres that they want to cut down forest for, well, look at First Light Power, New Leaf Energy, and you will find out that First Light Power, who owns Northfield now, has their own lending arm, and they bought Durango, and now that $97 million lending bank of First Light Energy is connected to Wendell and connected to New Leaf Energy. And First Light is owned by PSP Investments, and the money is coming from Toronto, Dominion Bank, Royal Bank of Canada. Boston is still looking at Western Massachusetts as their little playground, and there is an ugly Bermuda Triangle that goes from Boston, who has 20% office buildings that are not even, they're just throwing them up and they're not even being used. And they're going to use our landscape to steal that money, and the money's going to go to Canada. So I know that's a long way around, and I know you talk about a lot of stuff, but I just think we need to look at ourselves and say, okay, if we can no longer look at us like our country likes to look at us and see us as consumers, we have to stop thinking about ourselves as consumers. Sorry for serving this.
Anyone else?
Carla, you're not wrong. I'm sorry.
So this is, I'm not sure how realistic this is, maybe it's magical thinking. but I'm trying to imagine some kind of construction where you could have solar panels in parking lots above the cars. So it would, you know, have some poles up and essentially hang the panels above the parking space. But that means the poles and the installation of the poles and the maintenance of the poles. Is that something that is even conceivable, or would that be way too expensive?
The jail right now.
Yeah, that's not magical thinking at all. You know, I'll jump on what Carl said and say, you know, yes, Carl is absolutely right. We really should, as a society and as individuals, take into account what our consumption is and really think long and hard about what our consumption is and try to lower our consumption wherever we can and however we can. And I agree with that, and that was the premise of what we worked on. Claire and I worked on as individuals, Claire and I worked on as a team, Claire and I worked on, you know, with Greenfield Solar in the beginning of Greenfield Solar. And, you know, people will not reduce their usage to the point that we want them to reduce their usage to. And it's banging your head against the wall, swimming upstream, whatever you want to say, you know. That's how that part of it feels. And I still agree with Carl and still think that, you know, we need to do that kind of thing, but there's a certain amount that is not going to get done in that way. And so what we need to do is we need to take the energy that everybody's going to consume anyway, because they're not going to be as cognizant of that, and come up with the best solution for that energy that is going to be used anyway. And the best solution for that is not necessarily going to be on the farm fields. It's not necessarily going to be clear cutting acres and acres and acres of, you know, forest land. The best way is going to be taking the places that we can do it. You know, I'm certainly most familiar with doing it on rooftops, doing it in backyards, that kind of thing. But we certainly do carport structures. We do carport structures on a smaller scale, you know, residentially. We've got a handful of customers that we're working with right now where we are doing residential carports at their residence. And that is perfectly feasible. I've got a carport at my own house. Carports for, you know, factory parking lots, shopping areas, you know, that kind of thing. I think that stuff really is feasible too. And, you know, we touched on part of the problem with that is the cost. You know, the cost of putting the holes in the ground, you know, the amount of steel that it takes to do it, the amount of steel infrastructure that you need to put solar panels on. There definitely is a higher cost for doing canopies, for doing carports, for doing that kind of thing. And that's part of what Claire and the group that she's been involved in have been working really hard on lately, and just actually CBAIN, Solar Energy Business Association of New England, just did comments on what the next SMART program is going to be, which is a state-run incentive program that got to the point where there was no incentive in doing that program at all because they weren't very smart when they implemented it. But, you know, the SMART 2.0, a lot of what Claire and her group worked on was how much more does it cost to do residential rooftop than it does utility scale? How much more does it cost to do ground mounted than it does utility scale? How much more does it cost to do canopies and carports than it does utility scale, you know, developer scale? And should the incentives be structured to kind of level the playing field with some of those, you know, like you talk about, carports? Carports are more expensive. What should the adder be for doing carports if carports can be sited in better locations than taking prime farmland or forest land and, you know, going for the cheapest alternative. Let's figure out a way to incentivize good siting. So yeah, that stuff is being worked on. You're absolutely right with that.
Well, we're done. Thank you very much. And we'll continue this informally.
You asked me to talk about tractors and I didn't shut down for us. Thank you.